The emergency room doors burst open at 2:47 a.m., and Lieutenant Marcus Chen knew he was in trouble. Blood soaked through his tactical vest, his vision blurred from the explosion that had torn through his convoy just hours earlier in Syria. But what he didn't know was that the person who would save his life was someone the entire medical staff had written off as just another face in scrubs. Sarah Williams pulled her hair back into a ponytail and checked the patient assignment board one more time. Room 6, another routine case, according to Dr. Harrison's notes. She'd been working the night shift at Metropolitan General for 8 months now, and every single day felt like a battle to prove she belonged here. The other nurses whispered about her background, questioned her experience, treated her like she was playing dress up in medical scrubs. If you want to see how a nurse everyone underestimated becomes the only person standing between a Navy SEAL and certain death, make sure you hit that subscribe button because what happens next will completely change how you think about the people who dedicate their lives to saving others. Dr. Harrison barely glanced up when Sarah entered the trauma bay. He was reviewing charts with that same dismissive expression she'd seen countless times before, the one that said she didn't quite measure up to his standards. The other medical staff exchanged those familiar looks, the ones that made her feel invisible despite standing right there in the room with them. Lieutenant Chen lay unconscious on the gurney, his vitals weak but stable. The preliminary examination showed multiple shrapnel wounds, possible internal bleeding, and what appeared to be fragment injuries from an improvised explosive device. Standard protocol called for immediate surgery, but something about the wound patterns made Sarah pause. She'd seen injuries like this before, but not in any civilian hospital. Dr. Harrison started explaining the surgical plan to his residents, his voice carrying that tone of absolute authority that brooked no questions from anyone, especially not from a nurse who'd only been on staff for less than a year. The plan was textbook, methodical, safe. It was also completely wrong for this type of injury, but Sarah knew better than to speak up. She'd learned that lesson the hard way during her first few weeks here. The surgical team began prepping Lieutenant Chen for the operating room when his eyes suddenly snapped open. His hand shot out, gripping Sarah's wrist with surprising strength for someone who'd lost so much blood. His voice was barely a whisper, but his words cut through all the medical chatter like a blade. Sarah froze. She stared down at the wounded SEAL, recognition dawning in her eyes. This wasn't just any patient. This was someone from a world she'd tried desperately to leave behind. A world where split-second decisions meant the difference between coming home alive or in a flag-draped coffin. Dr. Harrison noticed the exchange and stepped closer, his expression shifting from routine professionalism to irritated confusion. He didn't understand why his patient was refusing standard care, why he was specifically asking for a nurse to handle his case, why someone trained in the most elite military operations would trust his life to someone the medical establishment had deemed barely qualified. Lieutenant Chen's grip tightened on Sarah's wrist. His eyes locked onto hers with desperate intensity, and she saw something there that made her blood run cold. This wasn't just about medical treatment. This was about survival, about secrets that couldn't be spoken aloud in a room full of civilian medical staff who had no idea what kind of operations happened in the shadows of America's foreign conflicts. The monitors started beeping more urgently. Lieutenant Chen's blew, his heart rate becoming pressure was dropping irregular. DRD to C. Harrison moved 8 to proceed with his patient, but Sarah found planned surgery, forward.d herself stepping months. She spoke the first time in 8-4 of someone who'd seen the voice with things that would haunt most people's nightmares. What she everyone said next would shock in that trauma bay and force them to confront the reality that sometimes the people you underestimate are exactly the ones you need most when everything falls apart. The revelation hit the medical team like a thunderbolt. Sarah's words carried weight that no one in that room had expected, authority that came from experience most civilian doctors would never understand. But Dr. Harrison's medical training warred with his ego, his need to maintain control over his domain conflicting with the growing evidence that this nurse might know something he didn't. Lieutenant Chen's condition deteriorated rapidly. The fragments weren't just causing external wounds, they were shifting inside his body, moving toward vital organs with each heartbeat, each breath, each movement that brought him closer to internal catastrophe. Sarah could see the signs that the others were missing, subtle indicators that spoke of battlefield medicine and trauma protocols developed in war zones where there was no room for error. Dr. Harrison demanded explanations. He wanted credentials, documentation, proof that Sarah was qualified to make the medical assessment she was suggesting. But military medical records aren't public documents, and some experiences can't be verified through normal channels. The kind of training Sarah had received happened in places that officially didn't exist, treating injuries from operations that were never acknowledged by any government agency. The other nurses began to see Sarah differently. Her movements around the medical equipment weren't those of someone learning procedures. They were practiced, efficient, automatic. She checked Lieutenant Chen's vitals with the precision of someone who'd done battlefield triage under fire, someone who'd made life and death decisions when there was no backup coming and no margin for error. Lieutenant Chen drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time his eyes opened, they sought out Sarah's face. He was trying to communicate something beyond his immediate medical needs, something about the mission that had put him in this hospital bed, something about why he specifically needed someone with her particular set of skills to keep him alive. Dr. Harrison found himself caught between his professional protocols and the growing realization that his patient's survival might depend on trusting someone he'd consistently undervalued. The standard surgical approach wasn't working. Lieutenant Chen's condition was becoming more complex by the minute, requiring decisions that went beyond textbook medicine into the realm of combat trauma care. Sarah stood at a crossroads that would define not just Lieutenant Chen's survival, but her own future in medicine. She could remain silent, let the established medical hierarchy handle the case according to standard procedures, and watch a good man die because pride prevented proper treatment. Or she could reveal the truth about her background, face the consequences of her deception, and fight to save the life of someone who'd served his country in ways most people would never understand. The monitors continued their urgent beeping. Time was running out. Lieutenant Chen's fragments were shifting closer to his heart with each passing moment. Dr. Harrison's surgical plan would likely kill him, but Sarah's alternative approach would require her to step out of the shadows and reveal secrets she'd spent 8 months carefully hiding. What happened next would transform not just one night in a metropolitan emergency room, but the entire understanding of who deserves respect in the world of life saving medicine. The nurse they'd all dismissed as inexperienced was about to prove that sometimes the most important qualifications can't be found in any personnel file, and sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person everyone needs. The silence in Trauma Bay 6 stretched like a taut wire. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the room, The judgment of colleagues who'd spent months treating her like she was playing pretend in medical scrubs. Dr. Harrison's impatience was palpable, his need for answers warring with Lieutenant Chen's rapidly declining condition. Sarah made her decision. She stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. I need everyone except essential personnel to leave this room immediately. This patient requires specialized trauma protocols that aren't taught in civilian medical programs. Dr. Harrison bristled. Nurse Williams, you're overstepping your authority. I don't care what this patient thinks he remembers. You're not qualified to make treatment decisions. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Dr. Harrison? Lieutenant Chen has fragmentation wounds from a Russian made explosive device. The metal pieces are magnetized and will shift toward his cardiac wall if we follow standard positioning protocols. I've extracted these exact fragments 43 times in field hospitals. 43 times, Dr. Harrison. How many times have you? The room fell silent except for the beeping monitors. Lieutenant Chen's hand found Sarah's wrist again, his grip weaker now, but still insistent. His lips moved, forming words only she could hear. The package. They can't know about the package. Sarah's blood chilled. She understood now why Lieutenant Chen had specifically asked for her. This wasn't just about medical treatment. This was about operational security, about classified materials that couldn't fall into the wrong hands, about secrets that went far beyond anything the civilian medical staff could be trusted with. Dr. Harrison moved closer, his frustration mounting. What package? What are you talking about? Lieutenant Chen requires immediate surgery, and I won't have my treatment protocols questioned by a nurse who's been here less than a year. Sarah looked at Lieutenant Chen's pale face, saw the trust in his eyes despite his weakening condition. She'd spent 8 months hiding who she really was, trying to blend into civilian medicine, hoping to escape the ghosts of her military service. But some responsibilities never end, some oaths never expire, and some brothers in arms never stop needing you to. I became a nurse at this hospital. Sarah have their backs, the four said quietly. I spent 6 years as a Navy hospital corpsman attached to SEAL Team 6. I hold security clearance levels that most people in this building don't even know exist. I've performed battlefield surgery under direct enemy fire in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and places whose names I'm not authorized to mention. The trauma bay erupted in shocked whispers. Dr. Harrison stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The other nurses exchanged glances that spoke of suddenly understanding why Sarah always seemed so calm during medical emergencies, why her hands never shook during procedures, why she moved through crisis situations with unshakable composure. Lieutenant Chen's monitors showed his condition deteriorating faster. Sarah could see the signs that civilian trained medical staff would miss. The specific pallor that indicated internal bleeding from magnetized fragments, the subtle changes in breathing that meant metal was shifting toward his lungs, the irregular pulse pattern that warned of cardiac involvement. Dr. Harrison, Sarah continued, her voice carrying authority that made everyone listen, these fragments will kill him if we follow standard surgical protocols. The magnetic properties cause them to migrate during traditional positioning. I need surgical control, specialized instruments, and complete operational security. This patient's survival depends on procedures that aren't in any civilian medical textbook. Dr. Harrison struggled with the implications. His ego warred with the growing evidence that Sarah possessed knowledge and experience far beyond anything he'd imagined. But Lieutenant Chen's declining vitals forced the decision. Medical hierarchy meant nothing if the patient died on their watch. "What do you need?" Dr. Harrison asked, his voice tight with reluctant acceptance. Sarah moved into action with fluid precision. "Complete surgical authority. Non-magnetic instruments exclusively. The OR needs to be cleared of all electronic devices that could interfere with fragment positioning. And I need everyone except essential personnel to maintain operational security about what they see and hear tonight." She turned to Lieutenant Chen, whose eyes were growing unfocused. The package he'd mentioned was still his primary concern, even as his body shut down from blood loss. Sarah understood the weight of classified missions, the burden of carrying secrets that could compromise national security, the responsibility of protecting information even when facing death. "Lieutenant Chen," she whispered, leaning close to his ear, "the package is secure. Your mission parameters remain classified. I've got your six, and I'm bringing you home." His grip on her wrist relaxed slightly. Relief flickered across his features as unconsciousness claimed him. Sarah straightened, her transformation from dismissed nurse to battlefield medic complete in the eyes of everyone watching. The surgical team assembled with new respect and growing tension. They were about to witness procedures developed in combat zones, techniques refined under conditions where failure meant watching fellow Americans die thousands of miles from home. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she prepared instruments that most civilian hospitals rarely used. Dr. Harrison watched her work, beginning to understand that the quiet nurse he'd consistently underestimated was about to perform surgery at a level he'd never seen before. The question wasn't whether she was qualified. The question was whether the rest of them were prepared to assist in procedures that pushed the boundaries of what they thought possible in emergency medicine. Sarah looked at Lieutenant Chen's unconscious form and made a silent promise. She'd failed patients before, lost good people despite her best efforts, carried the weight of impossible decisions made under impossible circumstances. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had everything she needed to bring a fellow warrior home alive. The operating room doors opened, and Sarah walked through them, knowing that the next few hours would either vindicate her hidden expertise or cost Lieutenant Chen his life. Either way, the nurse everyone had mocked was about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. The operating room fell silent as Sarah scrubbed in with movements that spoke of muscle memory forged in places most people couldn't imagine. Her hands moved through the ritual with precision that made the assisting nurses pause. This wasn't the hesitant preparation of someone uncertain about procedures. This was the methodical efficiency of someone who'd scrubbed for surgery while explosions echoed outside field hospitals. Dr. Harrison positioned himself across the table, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by wary attention. He'd agreed to let Sarah lead, but his medical training warred with everything he thought he knew about hospital hierarchy. Watching her work, he began to understand that some expertise couldn't be measured by years of civilian experience or degrees hanging on office walls. Lieutenant Chen lay unconscious under the surgical lights, his life measured in heartbeats and declining blood pressure. The magnetized fragments were shifting with each pulse, moving incrementally closer to vital organs. Sarah could visualize their positions based on wound patterns she'd seen too many times before, in places where medical mistakes weren't just malpractice lawsuits, but death sentences for America's finest warriors. The first incision revealed the complexity of Lieutenant Chen's injuries. 3 fragments, irregularly shaped, designed to cause maximum internal damage. But their positions weren't random. Sarah recognized the blast pattern, understood how Russian-made explosives drove metal through human tissue in predictable sequences. Knowledge gained from treating casualties that never made it into official casualty reports. Dr. Harrison leaned closer, studying Sarah's technique. Her approach defied conventional surgical wisdom, yet every movement demonstrated absolute confidence. She wasn't following textbook procedures because textbooks didn't cover what happened when warriors carried classified materials into combat zones where capture meant compromising national security. The largest fragment sat dangerously close to Lieutenant Chen's heart, shifting slightly with each beat. Standard extraction would require positioning that could drive the metal deeper, potentially puncturing the cardiac wall. But Sarah had developed alternative approaches during deployments where losing patients wasn't acceptable, where every wounded operator represented years of training and classified knowledge. Sarah's hands moved with surgical precision that made the operating room staff reconsider everything they thought they knew about emergency medicine. She worked with instruments most civilian hospitals rarely used, techniques developed in forward operating bases, where innovation meant survival and hesitation meant watching fellow service members die. 3 hours later, Lieutenant Chen's vitals stabilized as Sarah completed the final suture. The fragments had been extracted without incident, the classified materials secured, and a fellow warrior's life saved by someone everyone had dismissed as inadequate. Dr. Harrison stood in stunned silence, having witnessed surgical mastery that would reshape his understanding of true expertise. Sometimes the most qualified person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. And sometimes saving lives requires recognizing that strength comes in forms we never expect